So, did medieval people believe in werewolves? The short answer is yes, absolutely. But their werewolf was not always the monster we picture today. It was a creature born from threads of ancient myth, Christian theology, and the very real fears of a world lit only by fire. To understand the medieval werewolf, you have to look back long before the Middle Ages even began. The idea of a person turning into a wolf is incredibly old. It's a fear and a fascination that haunted the ancient world, too. The Greeks had stories. Their most famous one is about a king named Lycaon. The story goes that the god Zeus, disguised as a traveler, visited Lycaon's court to see if humans were as wicked as he'd heard. Lycaon, arrogant and cruel, decided to test the stranger to see if he was really a god. He did something horrific. He killed a hostage, or in some versions his own son, and served the cooked flesh to Zeus. Zeus was not fooled. He was enraged. As punishment, he transformed Lycaon into a wolf. The king's savagery was made external. He became the beast he already was on the inside. This story, famously told by the Roman poet Ovid, was a cornerstone. It established a powerful idea that turning into a wolf was a divine punishment for unspeakable acts, especially cannibalism. But it wasn't just a single myth. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about a tribe he called the Nuri, who lived somewhere near modern-day Poland. He reported as a piece of traveler's information that every man in this tribe turned into a wolf for a few days each year and then changed back. Herodotus himself sounded a bit skeptical, saying, "I do not believe it, but they say it anyway." It shows that the concept of entire groups of people transforming was already part of the world's collection of strange tales. It was folklore, a story told about a distant, mysterious people. The Romans inherited these Greek ideas and added their own. The writer Pliny the Elder, a man who tried to catalog everything in the natural world, mentioned werewolves. Like Herodotus, he was skeptical, he treated it as a tall tale, but felt it was his duty to record what people believed. He tells the story of a man from a certain family who was chosen by lot each year. This man was taken to a swamp, where he took off his clothes, hung them on an oak tree, and swam across. On the other side, he became a wolf and roamed with a pack for 9 years. The catch was, if he didn't attack any humans during those 9 years, he could swim back, retrieve his clothes, and become a man again. This story adds new elements. The transformation is temporary. It's tied to a specific place, and there are rules. It's almost like a ritual or a curse with an escape clause. Then there was the far north. The Norse people had their own version of the Wolfman. They had the Ulfhednir, which means wolf coats. These were warriors, much like the more famous berserkers who wore bear skins. These men were said to channel the spirit of the wolf in battle. They would howl, foam at the mouth, and fight with a terrifying animalistic fury. They weren't literally transforming their bodies, but they were transforming their minds. They were blurring the line between man and beast to become the ultimate warrior. The Volsunga saga, a famous Icelandic story, tells of a father and son who find magical wolf skins. When they put them on, they can't take them off. They are trapped as wolves, howling and fighting, their human minds struggling inside the animal form. All these ancient beliefs mattered. They seeped into the collective consciousness of Europe. When the Roman Empire fell and the medieval period began, people didn't just forget these stories. They carried them forward. They carried the idea of the wolf as a punishment from the gods. They carried the folklore of entire tribes of wolf people living on the fringes of the known world. And they carried the image of the warrior who draws strength from the wolf's spirit. The medieval world didn't invent the werewolf. It inherited a monster that was already ancient, and then reshaped it in its own image, blending old pagan fears with new Christian anxieties. The stage was set for the werewolf to walk out of the ancient myths and into the medieval forest. The medieval world took the old idea of a wolfman and made it its own. And the most surprising thing is that there wasn't just one kind of medieval werewolf. There were several, and not all of them were evil. In fact, some of the most famous werewolf stories from the Middle Ages are about victims, noble figures trapped in a wolf's body. The werewolf could be a tragic hero just as easily as it could be a ravenous monster. One of the most popular stories came from a poet named Marie de France, who wrote in the 12th century for the English court. Her tale was called Bisclavret. It's the story of a baron in Brittany who has a terrible secret. He disappears for 3 days every week. His wife, terrified, begs him to tell her where he goes. He finally confesses he is a werewolf. He strips off his clothes, hides them carefully, and transforms into a wolf. The clothes are the key. Without them, he can never turn back. His wife is horrified. She conspires with another knight, who she fancies, to steal her husband's clothes while he is in wolf form. The baron is trapped. He is forced to live as a wolf in the forest, But this wolf is not a monster. He is gentle. He still has his human mind and his noble heart. He becomes a companion to the king, who finds him in the woods and is amazed by the wolf's intelligence and mild manners. One day, the king holds a great court. The wife's new lover, the knight who helped her, shows up. The wolf, Bisclavret, sees him and attacks him viciously. Everyone is shocked. Later, the wife herself comes to court. Bisclavret attacks her too, biting off her nose. The king, being a wise man, realizes this is no ordinary wolf. The wolf only attacks these two people. He has the wife questioned and she confesses everything. They find the clothes, and the baron transforms back into his human self. He gets his lands back, and his treacherous wife is exiled. Her children, the story notes, were often born without noses. This story shows a completely different kind of werewolf. Bisclavret is a victim of a curse and a betrayal. His transformation is a private agony, not a public menace. He is noble in wolf form and in human form. Stories like this, called lace, were very popular among the aristocracy. They presented the werewolf as a symbol of loyalty and the suffering of a good man. Another romance, Guillaume de Palerme, tells of a prince who is transformed into a werewolf by his evil stepmother. He becomes the protector of a young princess, a kind and gentle beast who helps the heroes. Here again, the werewolf is the good guy, but that was the view from the castle. Down in the villages, the view was much darker. Chroniclers and theologians wrote about a very different kind of creature. Gervase of Tilbury, an English writer from the early 13th century, collected stories of what he called Gerwolfi. These were not cursed noblemen. These were people, often men, who actively chose to become wolves. He said they transformed during the new moon and would attack and devour infants. This is the monster we are more familiar with. It's a creature of pure malice, a sorcerer who uses dark magic to prey on the innocent. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a crime. Somewhere between these two extremes was a third type of werewolf, one born from a saint's curse. One of the strangest and most detailed accounts comes from Gerald of Wales, a 12th century cleric. He tells a story of a priest traveling through Ossory in Ireland. The priest is lost in the woods at night when a wolf approaches his campfire. The wolf speaks to him. It explains that it is actually a man. Two people from his clan, a man and a woman, are cursed by a saint to spend 7 years as wolves. After 7 years, they can become human again, and another two from their clan must take their place. The wolf's mate, his wife, is dying. He begs the priest to come and give her the last rites. The priest is terrified, but agrees. The male wolf peels back the skin from the female wolf's chest to show the form of an old woman underneath, proving his story. The priest gives her communion, and she dies peacefully. This story from Ossory is fascinating. These werewolves are not noble knights, but they aren't evil sorcerers either. They are ordinary people suffering under a long-lasting curse. They are objects of pity and fear at the same time. They retain their human reason and their Christian faith, even in wolf form. They are stuck between the world of humanity and the world of beasts. This variety shows us that the medieval mind didn't have a single fixed idea of a werewolf. It was a flexible concept. A werewolf could be a reflection of a betrayed nobleman, a tale of monstrous evil, or a strange story about God's mysterious punishments. The shape of the wolf depended entirely on who was telling the story. If people believed in werewolves, they also had ideas about how someone became one. The methods were varied and reflected different levels of belief, from folk magic to demonic pacts. It wasn't always as simple as being bitten, which is a much more modern idea. In the medieval view, becoming a werewolf could be a choice, a curse, or simply a terrible accident of birth. One of the most common beliefs involved magic objects, particularly salves or belts. This ties the werewolf closely to the world of witchcraft and sorcery. A person who wanted to become a wolf would concoct a special ointment. The recipes for these salves, which appear in later trial records, were filled with potent and often poisonous ingredients like nightshade, hemlock, and wolfsbane, mixed with animal fat. The person would strip naked and rub the ointment all over their body. The psychoactive properties of the plants might have caused powerful hallucinations, making the user truly believe they were transforming. In their mind, they were no longer human. They were a wolf, ready to hunt. Another powerful object was the wolf belt or wolf skin. The idea was that a magical belt, often made of wolf hide, was the key to the transformation. Buckling the belt would trigger the change, and unbuckling it would reverse it. This method puts the power firmly in the user's hands. It's a deliberate act. It's not a curse they suffer, but a power they wield. This kind of werewolf was usually the evil kind, a sorcerer who chose this path for their own wicked reasons. The Norse sagas, with their magical wolf pelts that trap the wearer, show the danger of this kind of magic. The power could easily turn into a prison. Then there was the curse. This is the werewolf of romance and tragedy, like Bisclavret. A curse could be laid by anyone with magical power, a jealous witch, an angry saint, or a wrong sorcerer. In these stories, the victim is usually innocent. The transformation is an affliction, a terrible fate they must endure. They often keep their human mind trapped inside a beast's body. The curse could be for a set number of years, like the werewolves of Ossory, or it could be permanent unless broken by some specific act, like retrieving the lost clothes. This type of transformation was a matter of destiny, not choice. Sometimes you didn't need any magic at all. You could just be born into it. Certain circumstances of birth were thought to mark a child for lycanthropy. Being born on Christmas Eve, for example, was considered deeply unlucky in some parts of Europe. It was seen as a mockery of Christ's birth, and the child was thought to be doomed to become a werewolf. Another belief was that if a child was conceived on a holy day or born with teeth or a full head of hair, they were also at risk. These were signs that something was unnatural about the child from the very beginning. As the Middle Ages wore on, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, another explanation became more and more dominant: the pact with the devil. Theologians and demonologists began to argue that such a profound transformation of the body could not be accomplished by simple folk magic. It required a supernatural power, and that power was demonic. To become a werewolf, a person had to renounce God and pledge their soul to Satan. In return, the devil would grant them the power to change shape. This explanation tied werewolves directly into the growing panic about witchcraft. The werewolf was no longer just a monster or a cursed man, he was a heretic, an agent of hell on earth. So, why did these beliefs take such a strong hold? They served a purpose. In a world full of real dangers, the werewolf was a way to explain the unexplainable. It gave a face to the terror of the deep dark woods. Real wolves were a constant threat to livestock and sometimes people. A werewolf was the ultimate expression of that fear. A wolf with human intelligence and malice. It was also a way to explain shocking human violence. If a person in a village committed brutal, senseless murders, it was easier for people to believe they were a werewolf than to accept that a normal human being was capable of such acts. The werewolf was an explanation for the serial killer. The belief also policed the boundaries between the human and the animal, the civilized and the wild. The werewolf represented the beast within every person, the savage instincts that society tried to suppress. The stories served as a warning: do not stray too far from God and community, or the beast might take over. It was a powerful metaphor for humanity's struggle with its own dark side, played out in stories of magic ointments, cursed knights, and demonic pacts. While peasants and nobles told stories about werewolves around the fire, the official institutions of the time, the church and the law, had to figure out what to do with the belief. Their response was complicated, and it changed over time. For much of the early Middle Ages, the official church position was that a literal, physical transformation from human to wolf was impossible. The most influential voice on this was St. Augustine, a theologian from the late Roman Empire whose writings were the bedrock of medieval Christian thought. In his book, The City of God, Augustine addressed the matter directly. He argued that only God could truly change the fundamental substance of a creature. A man, a witch, or even the devil himself did not have that power. Therefore, he concluded, werewolves were not real in a physical sense. They were illusions. Augustine proposed that demons could create phantoms or manipulate a person's mind, making them dream or hallucinate that they were a wolf. The person might fall into a deep sleep while a demon, taking the form of a wolf, committed atrocities. Or the person might simply be mad, suffering from a form of melancholy that made them believe they were an animal. For Augustine, the sin was not in becoming a wolf, but in believing that such a thing was possible. This view held for centuries. Early medieval legal codes and penitentials, which were handbooks for priests, treated the belief in shapeshifting as a pagan superstition. Burchard of Worms, in his Corrector from the early 11th century, listed a penance for anyone who believed they could change themselves into a wolf. It was a sin of false belief, a remnant of a pre-Christian world. The official stance was clear: good Christians did not believe in such things. You could be punished for the belief itself, but you wouldn't be executed for actually being a werewolf. But popular belief is a stubborn thing. While theologians debated in Latin, common people continued to believe in the reality of the wolf man. The stories of Gervas of Tilbury and Gerald of Wales show that even educated men were fascinated by these accounts and reported them as true. The gap between official doctrine and folk belief was huge. People saw wolves, they saw violence, and they put the two together. Then, in the late Middle Ages, the tide began to turn. The intellectual climate shifted. The church became increasingly concerned with heresy and diabolism. The focus moved from werewolves as a pagan holdover to werewolves as a product of a demonic pact. This linked lycanthropy directly to witchcraft. The publication of books like the Malleus Maleficorum, The Hammer of Witches in the late 15th century, while not focused on werewolves, solidified the idea that witches and sorcerers made pacts with the devil to gain supernatural powers. This framework provided a new, terrifyingly plausible explanation for how a person could become a wolf. It was no longer a simple illusion, it was a gift from Satan. This shift had deadly consequences. Now, a person accused of being a werewolf wasn't just seen as delusional or superstitious, they were seen as a heretic who had sold their soul. This is when the werewolf trials began in earnest, mostly at the very end of the medieval period and into the early modern era. The charges were almost always a combination of lycanthropy, murder, cannibalism, and witchcraft. The accused would be tortured until they confessed not only to their crimes, but to the whole demonic narrative renouncing God, meeting the devil, receiving a magic salve or belt, and transforming into a wolf to kill children or livestock. One of the earliest major trials took place in Poligny, France in 1521. A man named Pierre Bourgault confessed under torture that he had made a pact with the devil and, with his two companions, had used an ointment to become wolves. He described in gruesome detail how they had killed and eaten a young boy. All three were executed. The famous case of Peter Stump in Germany in 1589, though technically just after the medieval period, is the ultimate example of this trend. He was accused of being a werewolf for 25 years, responsible for the deaths of over a dozen people, including his own son, whose brains he confessed to eating. He claimed the devil had given him a magical belt that turned him into a wolf. He was brutally executed, and his story was printed and circulated across Europe as a terrifying warning. The judges and demonologists began to argue fiercely that the transformation was real. Jean Bodin, a French political philosopher, wrote in his book on the demon mania of witches that werewolves were an undeniable fact and that to doubt their existence was to doubt the power of the devil and, by extension, the power of God. The old skepticism of St. Augustine was pushed aside in favor of a new, terrifying certainty. For a time, the courts of law became the place where the folk monster of the forest was transformed into a legal and theological reality with horrific results for the accused. The belief in werewolves as a real and present danger couldn't last forever. The intense period of werewolf and witch trials in the 16th and 17th centuries was the terrifying peak of the belief, but it also marked the beginning of its end. Slowly, over the next couple centuries, the werewolf began a long retreat, moving out of the courtroom and the real world, and back into the realm of story and imagination where it had started. The first major blow to the belief was the rise of scientific reason during the Enlightenment. And scholars and doctors began to look for rational, natural explanations for things that had once been blamed on the supernatural. The idea of a man physically changing into a wolf started to seem not just improbable, but absurd. They revisited the old ideas of St. Augustine, but gave them a medical twist. They proposed that people who claimed to be werewolves were not possessed by demons, but were suffering from a mental illness. They called it lycanthropy, a specific delusion where a person believes they are a wolf. They might act like one, crawling on all fours, howling, and living in the wild, but their body remained human. Other medical conditions were also proposed as possible explanations for some of the stories, like rare genetic disorders that cause excessive hair growth, or rabies, which can cause aggressive behavior and foaming at the mouth. The monster was being reclassified as a patient. At the same time, the world itself was changing. Great dark forests of medieval Europe were shrinking. Wolves, which had been a very real part of daily life and a source of constant fear, were being hunted to extinction in many places. In England, the last wild wolf was killed sometime around the end of the 15th century, though they survived longer in Scotland and mainland Europe. As the real animal disappeared, the monster it inspired became less immediate, less threatening. It's easier to believe a werewolf is hiding in the woods outside your village when you know for a fact that actual wolves are out there. When the woods are empty, the monster loses its hiding place. So the werewolf faded from reality, but it did not disappear. It simply changed its habitat. It became a creature of folklore. Storytellers like the Brothers Grimm in the 19th century collected old folk tales, including stories about werewolves. But now they were presented as fairy tales, stories for children, or for preserving a nation's cultural heritage, not as accounts of real events. The werewolf was safely confined to the pages of a book, a character in a story, no longer a neighbor who might be leading a monstrous double life. Then, fiction writers picked up the creature and gave it a new life. The Gothic novels of the 19th century loved monsters, and the werewolf was a perfect fit. But these writers, and later, filmmakers, changed the rules. They invented many of the werewolf traits that we now consider essential. The idea that a werewolf is compelled to change during the full moon was not a major part of medieval belief. Their transformations were often voluntary or tied to magic objects. The notion that a werewolf can only be killed by a silver bullet is a product of 19th century fiction, later cemented by the 1941 Hollywood film The Wolfman. And most importantly, the modern werewolf story is almost always about contagion. You become a werewolf because you were bitten by one. It's like a disease, a tragic infectious curse that spreads from victim to victim. This is a profound shift from the medieval werewolf. The werewolf of the Middle Ages was a sorcerer who made a pact with the devil, a nobleman suffering under a specific curse, or a whole clan paying for a saint's anger. It was about choice, sin, or a unique fate. The modern werewolf is about a loss of control, an infectious plague, a struggle against a force that is now inside you. The story of Bisclavret is about a man trying to get his clothes back to restore his identity. The story of the Wolfman is about a man who knows the moon is rising and that he will lose his identity completely, becoming a danger to everyone he loves. So yes, medieval people believed in werewolves. They believed in them so strongly that they wrote them into their romances, their histories, and their law books. Their werewolf was a complex figure, sometimes a hero, sometimes a monster, sometimes a poor soul trapped between two worlds. It was a creature that explained their deepest fears about the wilderness, about violence, and about the darkness that can hide within the human heart. That creature is gone from our world. But its descendant, the movie monster with its silver vulnerability and its curse from a single bite, is the ghost of that older, more complicated beast that once stalked the forests of the medieval imagination.